Welcome back to FURYCAST. But first, make sure to like this video, subscribe, and of course, smash the bell for notifications. And don't forget to sign up to the mailing list for my new graphic novel, illustrated by the world-famous Ibai Canales. Sign up now. The link is in the description. He's been a practitioner, a competitor, and an instructor for over 30 years. He is now sensei at his dojo, Funakoshi Karate, Texas, in Richmond, Texas. But I've personally known him for over 20 years and can remember when he was a breakdancer. Today on FURYCAST, I welcome my friend, Kato Celeste. What's up, Kato?
What's going on, Derrick?
Me and you have been friends over 20 years at least, right?
Listen, man, late 90s, okay?
Yeah, absolutely, late 90s.
Yeah.
And if memory serves, you and I met at a McDonald's parking lot.
So I was in McDonald's, and I heard this guy walk into McDonald's, start talking about how good God is. Loud, too, loud, like super loud.
I must have come in right behind him.
Yeah, and I'm looking at, exactly, right? I was like, excuse me, man, I'm trying to listen to the other guy. Yeah, but yeah, so that was really the first time I got a glimpse of you, and what an impression to have, right? First impression, people remember you immediately, like just sharing the gospel and the goodness of God, So yeah, that recollection is impressed in my head, man.
That's crazy because I don't remember that.
No,
I mean, I remember meeting you, and I think you were having some car trouble or something was going on. I don't remember that part, but it's good. It blesses me to know that that's how it went down. You know what I mean? That's good to hear.
Absolutely.
Excuse me. Now, your story, we've been friends, like I said, more than 2 decades now. You're living in, is it Houston, Missouri City, Sugar Land? Where are you living?
Yeah, so I was probably about.
But where are you right now? Yeah, where are you now?
Well, I'm in Richmond now, Texas.
He's in Richmond, Texas now, but you're not originally from the Texas area.
No. When you and I met, I was 3 years in Texas after moving here from New York.
Okay, so take us back to a young Kato living in New York, dreaming of becoming a martial artist. How'd that? Tell us that story.
Yeah, no, for sure. Well, there's a difference between, and you'll hear this from a lot of New Yorkers, but there's a difference between the state of New York, the city of New York, and then the Bronx, okay? Because the city of New York is made up of 5 boroughs: Manhattan, Brooklyn, Queens, Staten Island. Some people don't even know about Staten Island. But then there's the Bronx, right? So these are the 5 boroughs. And if anybody is ever inclined towards any hip hop, okay, especially if you checked out the history of hip hop, you would know that the birthplace of hip hop is really from the Bronx. That's why it's called Boogie Down Bronx, right?
South Bronx,
and that's where I grew up. So growing up in the Bronx, one was the influence of hip hop for me, and then second was really the influence of martial arts. So here I am in the Bronx, where there's martial arts schools all over the place, right? Of course, unlike Texas, where you're driving everywhere to get to a dojo, over there you can walk 10 minutes, to every dojo. And it seems like everybody opened up their own dojo at the time. And when I got introduced into the martial arts, I actually got started first with praying mantis kung fu. And then from praying mantis kung fu, that was very short-lived. And then even more short-lived was the judo part. I did that for maybe 2 months, And then the longest that I got to experience martial arts was actually in Taekwondo. So
what age were you when you started Taekwondo?
When I was in Taekwondo, I was 12, 11, 12. And so by the time I got started into Taekwondo, I didn't really know any difference. All I knew was there was a lot of kicking. And, at my era, I'm 50 now, right? So growing up in my era, Bruce Lee was a major factor, right? Especially in New York City. If you ever go to New York City and you go to Chinatown, there's a main street there, main road called Canal Street. And during that time, there was this major martial arts store, and you would take the train, pretty much you take the 6 all the way up to Canal Street, and if you were ever into any Bruce Lee, you'd be buying posters at least once a week, right? And then you come home and put that sucker on the wall, and just try to pose, imitate. And of course, for me being Asian, I was already halfway there.
He had a head start on everybody.
Yeah, for sure, right? And so, that played a big influence for a lot of the kids in my neighborhood. And so, as far as like a Taekwondo school, all I knew was it was going to be a place where I get to kick a lot, and that was pretty much it, And I actually got to stay in Taekwondo until I got to about third degree in my black belt. But then there was an overlap in my training. Started training in Taekwondo, and then I started training in karate. Now, the interesting part about that is when I got introduced into karate, there was another overlap there, and that overlap was in a more contemporary style of karate, where the word karate wasn't actually pronounced. It was just mainly karate, right? And so it led me to go into an open circuit competition. And then from there, I met this guy. I thought he was phenomenal. His name is Jerry Fontanez. His nickname is actually called Fast Feet, which is very misleading because it's not just his feet, it's his hands too, right? And even quicker was his thinking, right?
Was he big on the tournament circuit? Because I've heard this name before.
Yes. Major name in the tournament circuit. And not just in the stateside, but even around the world. And as far as Sensei Jerry was concerned, this guy was he was ahead of his time, Derrick, honestly. He was viewed sometimes as very unorthodox, but really, just like Bruce Lee, who was ahead of his time. Some of the methodology was questionable, but really, it was just he was so far ahead that some of the things that he was introducing, people weren't quite ready for. There's a saying that sometimes the right action at the wrong time leads to resistance, right? So a lot of people were resisting those concepts that he was introducing, which was really, the focus was not changing the value of martial arts, not changing the value of character development, but maybe reassessing the methodology on how it was being taught, right? Because, years ago, teaching martial arts was very authoritarian. I'm the instructor, you do what I say, and if you question it, there's going to be some consequences to that, right? And of course, over the years, you see a paradigm shift in how people thought about what it meant to be a teacher, right? Basically, people started grasping the concept of servant leadership. So now you saw a shift of authoritarian to being authoritative. And so Sensei Jerry, really, his emphasis was, how do you contextualize teaching martial arts to the vast array of ages, right? Because there was a time in history where even children weren't allowed to take martial arts.
Oh, I remember.
Right? And so,
and then when we finally let them in, we taught them exactly the way we taught adults.
That's right. And there's a catch-22 to that, as you would be aware of, which is it doesn't quite work that way, right? Because the way they understand things, either they're going to misunderstand it, or we're using these $50 concepts, and these kids have like 5-cent mentality. To try to process that type of information can be overwhelming. It could be confusing. So that approach, really, Sensei Jerry was like, how do we create a methodology that can really connect with the community as a whole, whether you're a little kid or whether you're an adult or even older stages of adulthood, so that school, I saw him at a tournament. I got super inspired. Then I find out that, he's actually taking over a Taekwondo school that was around the corner from where I live. And then the rest was history, so to speak. You're just connecting with him. And then through him,
was that your first Taekwondo teacher or your second?
No, he was actually not my second. He didn't teach Taekwondo. Sensei Jerry he had his background in Shotokan and Taekwondo. Okay. As a matter of fact, there was another gentleman by the name of Sensei Tony Morrison. He had a stronger root actually in Shotokan as well. But they shared some similar backgrounds, but Sensei Jerry was the founder of the school. And what was interesting, Derrick, was this school was such a contemporary style school, and people never saw this type of martial arts school. So growing that school into over 300 students, and then expanding that school into branches in Queens and in Manhattan. Next thing you know, you're seeing over 600 students, becoming a part of this system. And by the time I got to 16 years of age, I ended up becoming, or at least I was appointed a position of being the senior instructor of this school. So you can imagine this 16-year-old, right, having a Mack truck engine on a Pinto car built. It was a lot. It was a lot to unpack. It was a lot to process. But it's something that I will forever be thankful for. It introduced me to an area of martial arts that I don't think I ever would have seen had I just been in a traditional school. But here we are, like, we come back full circle, and this is where I am now. I'm back to the traditional roots, and today I get a chance to look at those times. People just like Sensei Jerry, who, I'm gonna tell you, man, in everything that will ever be said about this man, I will say this: he was very intentional about sowing into you. And he made sure that before any seeds were sown, he definitely cultivated that soil first, and I saw him both as an older brother and even as a father figure in my life, and I'm forever grateful for the time that we spent together.
How long was that time?
Gosh, it was actually two seasons in my life. It was first in the late 80s, and then going into the early 90s. And then from there, that's when I ventured out to Texas, man. It was 1994 when I left, actually, March of 1994.
What brought you to Texas originally?
The original idea was actually to move to Arizona. Okay. I was going to help a friend of mine.
Oh, and then the car broke down at McDonald's and you just stayed. I got you.
Yeah, I think that's what happened. Yeah, that's what happened. Well, I figured, what, before I go to Arizona, let me go visit my sister, because my sister actually moved to Texas about 2 years before I came. And I figured, I'll go visit her for a week turned into a month, and then a month turned into a year. And then after that year is when I left for Arizona. And then about a year and a half, close to 2 years in Arizona, I came back to Texas. And that's when you and I met. Right around that time, so yeah.
And what was the goal here, to start teaching martial arts, or just to build a new life? Or
the goal, by the time I came back, the goal was to start off fresh. Martial arts has always been in my system, right? The beauty of martial arts, the idea of giving a platform to people that can even out the playing field, right? Martial arts, that's what's so beneficial about martial arts, right? It doesn't necessarily require a set of physical skills more than it is a desire to want to grow. So I've always been a big advocate of that principle. And so teaching martial arts to me, was always going to be a part of my life. And so when I moved back to Texas, just got started with the concept, got started with connecting with people here that I didn't really get a chance to connect when I first came to Texas, and a lot of that happened in the competition circuit. So yeah, but the idea of always teaching, the idea of teaching was always there. And the interesting part is, it was 1997. I had no idea, Derrick, what moving to Texas really meant, right? And what that was about. Because when people find out, I'm from New York City, especially from the Bronx, they're like, man, what made you move to Texas, when you're coming from New York? And I was like, today I tell people, it was all by the sovereign plan of God, really just, bringing me here, and in that sovereign plan, extending that saving grace, and to come to know him as Lord and Savior, man. Really, that's what it really came down to it. Why I moved to Texas. Hindsight now, of course.
God is good, right?
Oh yeah, all the time, right?
So then when you get here the second time, you're planted. What's the next phase in your martial arts journey?
Really connecting with people in the competition circuit, really brought about a network of relationships for me. Because of where I was coming from, especially, from Sensei Jerry, that was a household name already. So coming into Texas, I kind of felt obligated to uphold that name. People had an expectation of how my performance was going to be, and the catch-22 to that type of perception is sometimes you confuse credibility for ability, right? It's like, okay, well, look at you, you're so physically good at what you do, you must have credibility, right? When I say credibility, I'm talking about like the nature of your character, nature of your integrity. And so sometimes when you go to tournament circuits, there's a tendency to have these schools that represent the philosophy of martial arts, and at the same time, on the other end of that spectrum, there's a bit of superficialness, when it comes to tournaments, because you don't really see the nature of people's character, right? When it comes to tournaments, sometimes you'll see people compete and you see them go into this mode and you look at them and it's like, wow, look at you, man, you're like a samurai manifest, and then after they compete, you see their behavior and it's like, what happened to that dude? Right? So going into these circuits really kind of helped me narrow down who I really wanted to connect with, who I wanted to network with. And I can probably tell you, man, out of hundreds of people, I would narrow it down to maybe 5 people, that I'm still communicating with till this day. And it also helped me kind of really define what I was going to be about. It really defined how I was going to approach teaching martial arts. And it led to other opportunities for me, and even with opportunities and working with a program called Kickstart Kids, if you're familiar with that. It used to be called Kick Drugs Out of America.
Chuck Norris is, for those that don't know, it's was founded by Chuck Norris.
That's right.
As I believe Kick Drugs Out of America, where they actually teach a karate program inside middle schools all over the city of Houston and surrounding areas. It's been rebranded as Kickstart.
That's correct. Kickstart Kids.
You and I know a lot of people, have a lot of mutual friends.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
Dee Petway and Chelsea Clark and a bunch of people.
That's what I loved about, and I still do. I love the concept of Kickstart Kids, because the program is a character development program. And they just happen to teach character development through the martial arts. So they could have taught underwater basket weaving, right?
Yeah.
But the emphasis is still character development. So today, you see that program, expanding from Houston to Austin to Dallas. There's been over 100,000 plus students that have walked through those doors. Some of those students, Derrick, who started in 6th grade are now instructors in that program.
Yes.
And so it's the fruit of that program has definitely been amazing. But I'll tell you the most amazing part. The most amazing part was, and still is that knowing that Mr. and Mrs. Norris, are just led by the Lord. Right? They are God-fearing, man. They seek after God's kingdom and righteousness for sure. You can hear it in how they speak. You can hear it in how they share their ideas, and even the things that they post on social media. You can tell it's definitely kingdom led first. So I think that's the most exciting part about the whole.
This program. Man has met Chuck Norris. Everybody, I am jealous because he has met. He's shaking. He sat at a table. I saw a picture with you at a table with Chuck Norris. For people from my generation, that's beyond. You know what I mean? That's beyond, man.
Yeah, cool. I will say this. People like Mr. Norris, he's an icon, right? He is
he's as legit as they come.
Yeah.
Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu black belt.
Yeah. He's definitely one of those pillars of Americana as we see today. But the other aspect of that is that he's also very, very down to earth. Like, he's so approachable, it's not even funny. He makes it a point that if he was in a room with 500 people and he sees you by yourself, he would leave the 500 to sit with you. Yeah. That this is the kind of man that he is. And what you see is what you get, like consistency, man, of his nature, of his character, just upstanding, upright, I take my hat off to Mr. Norris, man, for sure.
Awesome. I believe it. And hopefully one day I'll get to shake his hand and talk to him. But let's go back a little bit. When you were now the style that you came to Houston with, was that American karate? Because when I first met you, you were promoting and teaching American karate.
That's right.
And we can get to the. Go ahead. Go ahead.
No, I'm sorry. Yeah, the idea of American karate, you know, and there's actually different ways of categorizing that. You can call it American karate. You can call it contemporary karate. You can call it modern karate. You know, it's been titled a few different ways. But really, for me, I would categorize it more as contemporary martial arts. And because sometimes, you know, when people talk about American karate, there's a stigma over that, right? Some people think American karate is, oh, this is the Western culture.
Watered down.
Yeah, watered down. You know, it's not really what it is. You know, and sometimes the idea of teaching anything outside of Okinawa, you know, really, it's like, you know, anything if it's not from Okinawa, it's, you know, it's no good. It's like. And there's a lot of people that think like that, okay? And I get where they're coming from, but you know, sometimes where it comes from originally, sometimes when it migrates into another country, it doesn't necessarily mean it gets worse. Sometimes it actually gets better. Things get improved, you know, like here, case in point. When you're teaching a traditional martial arts, you know, that comes from Okinawa in this case, right? And you try to teach that to cultures outside of Japanese culture, and you don't know how to contextualize that, you can have the greatest of messages, but if you lack in the method of communicating that, people will miss the message. You know, so coming into the Western culture where you had people who were, you know, highly educated, knew how to articulate these concepts and these philosophies and these principles, and then be able to contextualize it to the masses, I see that as an improvement, right? Now, of course, there's another side to that, which is where the negative stigma comes, and that is you've had these people that kind of got the idea of traditional martial arts, never really completed the concept in their minds, never really understood what the philosophy was, or never really trained in that style to the degree of where they could have trained, and then kind of just filled in the gaps, right, with their own personal philosophies and their own personal concepts, and then you create this hybridness of a type of martial arts that the person who don't know any better, you know, will look at you and take you at face value, you know. And so the people that have that background, the people that have the understanding of traditional martial arts will see that and say, hey, listen, that's not true, that's not correct. I mean, you take that parallel even with Christianity, right? Mm-hmm. You know, there are certain theology that is taught. There are certain doctrinal stances that people have. There are certain theological truth that must be held across the board, right? It transcends, you know, culture and concepts. It's the truth of God. But if we're not careful, especially if we lack that theological understanding, but we have the passion to share the kingdom of God and the goodness of God, you know, where we end up starting churches with good intent, right? Well-intent people who start churches that don't necessarily have the theological understanding. And so what that leads to is a lot of emotionally based teaching, right? Mm-hmm. And sometimes you know, scriptures that get taken out of context, you know, and try to find a way to explain things, but because of the lack of understanding of the scriptures, there's a tendency to make it more subject oriented, right? Mm-hmm. I call that topical teaching, mm-hmm. you know, and for me, you know, in my position in how I share theology. You know, I come from a very expository position, right? Exegetically try to teach. You know, the word expository, you can take that and break that down into two different words: extracting and then position, right? So when you're teaching scripture, you come from that place where you're led to a conclusion instead of coming in with preconceived thoughts, right? And then finding scriptures to justify it. So you take that same mentality and you bring that into your martial arts school, right? And to me, that's so vitally important in how we teach, you know, martial arts. You know, are we teaching it the same way? Are we taking the context of these techniques, right? Or some of the titles of these techniques, like here, case in point, right? In Japanese karate, you know, you and I understand front kick, right? Right. So in Japanese, the term front kick is called maigeri, right? And when we translate that into English, we come up with front kick. But the reality is maigeri actually is a verb, right? So instead, we've taken maigeri and made it into a noun. So we call it front kick. But if you really translate that properly, maigeri is not translated into front kick. It's translated into kicking to the front. See? So it changes things a little bit, right? So now instead of, you know, what you're doing, it's what you're doing plus how you're doing it plus where it's supposed to go, right? So then when you try to add all those concepts, it changes how you teach it. It makes you more responsible, first of all. You know, I have this philosophy when I speak, you know, whether I'm teaching the Bible or if I'm teaching martial arts. My philosophy goes like this. Number one, only talk about the things that you understand. Right? And then number two, remember somebody out there is going to be smarter than you, right? So it brings me back to number one. Therefore, only talk about things that you understand, you know, and then the willingness to say, hey, look, that's a great question. I don't know the answer to that question, but maybe we can navigate it together, right? You know, so for me, the way I view scripture and the way I teach scripture is the same way, you know, when I teach martial arts. So going back to your question about American karate and contemporary karate, for me, it's not so much the style, but it's the concept of how it's taught, right? It's not so much the method, but the methodology of how it's being taught is really how I define, you know, contemporary martial arts. Now, you said something a couple of minutes ago about how sometimes American karate is viewed as a watered down type martial arts, and you know,
not my opinion, by the way, but
right? No, yeah,
we've
but
heard
you're
these
right.
things.
You're right. That seems to be the consensus for a lot of people when they hear about American karate, and to a degree, they're not wrong. They're not wrong, because another byproduct of that watered down approach to martial arts is the confusion of confusing activity for accomplishment, right? When you have that style of martial arts being taught, you almost have to teach that pedal to the metal, right? You almost have to teach it in seminar mode at all times, right? You almost have to teach it like, you know, I got to keep juggling things because I got to maintain your attention here. And the last thing I want you to even question is, hey, what's that curtain over here? And what's going on behind that curtain? I can't teach that. I'm so stylistic in my teaching and even in my subject matter that if you approach things from a substance base, I have nothing to give. You know, I can't answer those questions, or I'm not that deeply rooted in my style, you know, so that tends to be the byproduct of westernized martial arts, you know, where we focus more on activities and we're more stylistic. And now I don't mind you being stylistic as long as, you know, what you're teaching is substance-based. Right? You know, I think it's important to engage your students. I think it's important to be able to teach in a manner that is exciting, you know, at the same time, being able to, like I said, you know, contextualize the subject matter and have people feel like, you know, they've learned something, you know, and even if it's just a minute thing, but you've planted the seed. And even if it means just provoking the thought to make them question things that weren't in their radar to begin with,
Yeah.
That to me is more beneficial than trying to, jam pack a class with so many activities. And yeah, you come out there like, wow, that was a lot of fun. You at the same time, you accomplish two things, as my students would say. What do we learn? What are the two things that you end up getting from that type of understanding? And they'll answer you. They'll say absolutely nothing. But you sweated, right? You smiled, you enjoyed it. And the parents see that and they're like, wow, look at you. That was a lot of fun. This is a great martial arts school. And to me, it's like,
hopefully you never need it.
Yeah, you had a great time. You had a great experience. But, that there was a missing aspect to that we don't want you to miss out on, because that's the most beautiful part, right? That's the most valuable part. That's the part that's going to sustain you longer than what you would have experienced just emotionally,
Yeah. Well, I find it interesting, going back to your point about, basically you're making a point that some people are closed-minded in the martial arts, that it has to be this way or no way, but excuse me, we both coughed at the same time. There you go. But I find it interesting because so many people from our generation were inspired by Bruce Lee, who created a martial art, which is a uniquely Western martial art, Jeet Kune Do, founded in the West with a Western mentality of taking what works, discarding what doesn't work, and then adding your own, what is uniquely your own, adding yourself into the mix, adding what, your knowledge and your experience into the mix. But I find it interesting that so many people start from Bruce Lee, then go to a school, and they don't take those concepts with them. It becomes very rigid. Their point of view becomes very closed-minded.
Sure. I mean, I'll give you an example of that struggle. So I am honored today to train under the tutelage of Shihan Kevin Funakoshi. So our school is a Shotokan school. We are blessed to not only be a Shotokan school, but we are specifically a Funakoshi karate dojo. So, as a lot of your viewers would be familiar with, and those who study traditional styles, the founder of Shotokan karate was a man by the name of Gichin Funakoshi. As a matter of fact, the whole concept,
you've got a poster of him on your wall back
there.
Yeah,
that's right. Okay, yeah. As a matter of fact, the whole concept of Kickstart Kids, honestly, man, didn't even start with Chuck Norris. The whole concept of Kickstart Kids with teaching martial arts in the schools actually started in Japan.
Yeah, he taught in the universities, didn't he?
Yes. Even till this day, you can be a professor in the university in Japan teaching martial arts. Mm-hmm. So I share all that because today we continue that lineage, because my sensei's father, Soke Kenneth Funakoshi, is a descendant of Gichin Funakoshi, a fourth generation. And then my sensei, Shihan Kevin Funakoshi, is a fifth generation Funakoshi. So you can imagine this incredible humbling opportunity to be able to teach under that lineage, and at the same time, this overwhelming responsibility to really teach it correctly. And one of the things that I try to share with people is, look, you look at Shotokan and you look at the traditional aspect of Shotokan, and yet, as my sensei would say, karate is taught so that the individual who practices it will benefit from it. Now, that's a very important statement because it has to benefit you. It still has to cater to you, right? In some sense, it still has to customize to you, your speed, your build, right? Your abilities, and maybe even your limitations. It's got to work for you. So like, you can train and do your techniques and look just like your sensei, but when it comes to functionality for your service, right, that's going to serve you, it doesn't work, right? Because you cater too much into imitating and emulating the outward appearance, that you forget that you still had to internalize the technique and convert it to your build, to your liking, to
Yeah.
your ability, you know. And that concept is what really what one of the things that Bruce Lee was talking about was, you know, it has to serve you. It's not about not. There was a big misconception in how people viewed Bruce Lee's philosophy. He wasn't saying, you know, traditional styles are not good, right? Because I mean, he created a style.
Mhm.
Right? I mean, he created a style. I mean, he created Jeet Kune Do, right? The way of the intercepting fist, right? It wasn't translated as the way of no way, you know, the way of your personal way. He called it the way of the intercepting fist, right? And the idea was, whatever it is that you're studying, it has to be able to serve you. It's got to work for you, right? Because at the end of the day, it has to be able to defend you, right? So if it can't defend you, then you either have to like change the way you're approaching it or change what you're approaching, right? But at the end of the day, a traditional style, the traditional aspect of it has to lead and lean more towards the philosophy of how it transforms you as a person. But if you take the traditional style and hold true to that, even in the physical training, then you're going to find yourself really missing out on a lot of things. You know, in Japan, there's this concept of Kaizen. And that word Kaizen means constant, never-ending improvement, right? You know, so if your methodology of martial arts is leading you to improve as a whole, right? Physically, mentally, emotionally, then great. At the same time, there's this misconception of schools that teach multiple styles in one dojo, right? It's a misunderstanding of going, hey, the more styles I take, the more well-rounded martial artist I become. That's not correct, right? That's actually false, because now you're thinking that, you know, if I take here, 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 and here, I come out with 100% me. That's not true. For you to come out with 100% you, everything you do has to be 100%, right? It's not like your typical math where it's 50 and 50 makes 100. This is a philosophical approach. So everything you do has to be 100% to get 100% outcomes, right?
So let me ask you this. You're not necessarily saying that studying multiple styles of martial arts are bad. You think it just needs more intention, or more intentionality, I should say, when doing that, or what's your take?
Yeah, sure. I mean, I go back to what I said before, you know, sometimes confusing activity for accomplishment, right? You know, you do all these different things and you confuse that for accomplishing much. And to me, I personally, there's a time for a buffet, right? Okay. There's a time for a buffet, and then there's a time to go to a very specific restaurant that serves a very specific dish.
Yeah.
Right. And to me, when I go to a buffet, I'm not looking at, I wonder how the lo mein is going to taste. Okay. When I go to a buffet, it's like, listen, I just want to eat, right? I want to eat, and I want to have, like, you know, a variety, right? And then there are days where I feel like, hey, I'm looking for something very, very specific, right? I know what it gives. I know, you know, I know what it provides. I know what's in it. I know how it's going to taste. And so I'm having that expectation. So, you know, I'm looking more for that specific flavor, right? Then whereas if I go to a buffet, it's like, hey man, you know, I'm just ready to eat, like food's going out of style, you know? So sometimes I feel like people are looking for that flavor for a specific restaurant and try to find it in a buffet, you see? And so you're going to have a hard time finding it, you know? And so instead, you know, you can find yourself even convincing yourself that, hey, you know what? This is really, 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 really good because I'm doing so much. Now, I know that there are people out there that are more than capable of multitasking, right? They're more than capable of compartmentalizing, you know, different styles and different techniques, you know, and being able to be disciplined enough to focus on that. But imagine a person who is going into these different styles who lack the discipline, right? Next thing you know, each style should have their form of discipline.
Yeah, everything's
And
different.
if you're trying to learn discipline, especially for the first time, and you're coming from, different forums trying to teach it, where there's similarities and yet enough differences that if you don't know any better, it can get really confusing, right? And so to me, there's an aspect to training that if somebody wants to cross train, that's fantastic. That's great. The more you can do, the merrier, for sure. But when it comes to martial arts, there are these philosophies and there are these principles and there are these concepts that are just as important, maybe even more so, that a person who is practicing different styles of martial arts can miss out on those valuable philosophies. So like I said, there are people out there that can compartmentalize it and they want to be able to cross train. Go for it. I can't encourage that enough. But for those people that are trying to better themselves, especially mentally as a whole, I would encourage them to say, hey, listen, find a school, find a style, get in there, dive in, get into the meat of it, right? Gain from the substance of that style. And then that way you can develop a stronger foundation for yourself, so that when you do study other styles, other schools of thought, right, you have a foundation that can help you filter some of those ideas, right? Like part of my prayer, Derrick, and this is every day, I pray for wisdom from the Lord so that I can recognize the things that he wants me to receive, right? I pray for discernment from the Lord so that I can recognize the things that he wants me to reject, and then continue to walk in humility so that I can always remember that only God can redeem, that I don't have that ability, right? So for me, when somebody trains in the martial arts and develops a strong foundation, that is rooted in the character of integrity, right? Then when it comes to training in other styles, they can approach that thing better position, to really understand concepts, even techniques, right? And then be able to filter those ideas that are like, okay, I get this part. I'm gonna hold on to that. I definitely am not gonna throw the baby out with the bathwater, so to speak, right? And I'm gonna take that. I'm gonna soak that in, and I'm gonna use that to improve myself. So that's really what I'm saying. It's not about going to a school that provides multiple styles. Even though that's a whole podcast in and of itself.
Yeah. Well, I mean, as far as me, I mean, I'm probably more of a mixed martial artist than anything, and I could say that we've been friends so long I feel like we can disagree. You know what I mean? And
Sure.
it shouldn't affect our friendship. But I mean, there's so much that I've gained from cross training that I can only recommend it. Well, I shouldn't say I can only recommend it, because everyone's journey is going to be different. And when you say cross training, that could mean a million different things. I don't recommend you training in styles that have conflicting ideologies, that conflicting,
great point.
Points of view in the martial arts. But I've met so many people and been able to gain in my own personal life and in my martial arts journey from different styles that I personally promote it. But I also appreciate the fact that there are people that are coming from a more traditional point of view that say, hey, this martial art is beautiful, dig in deep. And for somebody who I dabbled in Shotokan as a kid, so I support Shotokan. Shotokan is the largest karate that's it's more people train in Shotokan than any other style of karate, correct?
That's
across
it.
the world.
It's the most practiced Japanese karate in the world. But to support what you're just saying, right? That's exactly it. Like every person that I know who trains in other martial arts that really benefit from it, you can see that they all have a foundation already. Right? They have a good understanding. Like they've matured in their foundation as a martial artist, so that because of that, the benefit of that, and then training in other styles, it helps them to be able to really get the most out of that style because of that foundation, right? But for someone who, you know, is saying, you know, I want to be in martial arts. Okay, well, let me do this. I do this on Monday, I do this on Tuesday, I do this on Wednesday, I do this on Thursday, right? It's like, okay, that's all great. You're doing 4 different things. Unfortunately, you're putting like 25% in each one, expecting to get 100% result from every one of them. You know, and that to me is the challenge. And I love what you said about making sure that, you know, you're not practicing things that have conflicting thoughts or conflicting concepts, right? Where, you know, you can train in a style like Goju-ryu, right? Where every kick is like no higher than the waist. And that's going really high, right? And then you're training in Taekwondo where, you know, there's no bird safe around you because you're kicking like 12 o'clock, right? You know, and so to me, it's like when one style says no kick should be ever higher than a waist, and another style says, well, you should learn how to kick from the ankle all the way to the head, so that way there's no restriction, you know, in your options, right? You know, you have more options. So I get what both are saying, but if I didn't have the foundation that I had, that can be confusing to me, you know? So yeah, there's definitely redemptive points in every style.
Yeah. Well, take me back to how you connected and transitioned from American karate to the Funakoshi system and how that went down.
Yeah, sure. Well, there's a guy that actually played a big role in that, and his name is Wade Jenkins. I don't know if you ever got a chance to meet.
Yeah, I know Wade.
Yeah. So Wade, when Wade and I first met, it was 2002, 2003.
He was another Kickstart guy, right?
Yes, that's right. And, you know, we were talking about that style because he was already practicing Shotokan. And, you know, the influence that I've had in the style of Shotokan, even back in New York, you know, I've always viewed Shotokan as a beautiful style of martial arts. I've always leaned towards it. I've had a major inclination to that style above all the other Okinawan style or Japanese mainland styles that I've seen growing up in New York. And man, I tell you what, sometimes New York City, the practitioners of traditional styles over there are more Japanese than the Japanese. Okay? And none of them are Japanese. Okay. You know, so they definitely hold on to the whole aspect of the culture, you know, the practice and the rites and the rituals and things of that nature. So it's always been mystical for me, right? When seeing traditional styles that come from Okinawa and mainland Japan. But when it came to my exposure to Shotokan, to me, it was very rooted. It was very grounded, you know, and so I've always, you know, told myself when the opportunity comes and I get a chance to really venture into this style the way I would like to, you know, not just, you know, tidbits here and there, you know, and doing katas, you know, in tournaments because of the beauty of the katas in Shotokan. When that opportunity ever arises, that I would take it, you know. So that conversation with Wade Jenkins really got me like motivated, right? It got me like inspired, and then but didn't realize that there was going to be a delay in that time, because that was also the time when I left Kickstart, and I ended up taking a full-time position as a youth pastor in our church, you know. So
was this about 10 years ago or?
Yeah, over 10 years ago. This was 2003. So
okay,
just a little bit.
20 years
it's
ago.
Been a minute for sure. You know, so that kind of got delayed, you know. And so when I started venturing back into the idea of reconnecting with Kickstart, I was already practicing Shotokan. You know, I was starting to really get back into that style and started doing, you know, some serious soul searching, you know, when it came to how do I get myself really rooted into the style as a whole. You know, so when I was talking to Wade, I said, hey, listen, man, I want to go back into, I'm looking at going back into Kickstart, man. And this time when I go back to Kickstart, I want to be able to teach Shotokan. You know, that's all I wanted to do, all I wanted to do. So my desire and my hunger really to soak in as much as I could. I really feel like the grace of God really allowed me to have people who were rooted in Shotokan, you know, start to come into my life and start to sow, you know, those seeds, you know, that really continue to encourage me and inspire me. And like I said, you know, Wade Jenkins, you know, he was one of those guys that God really used. And then Wade also has his own martial arts uniform supply. You know, it's called, yeah, it's called Real Deal, right? Real Deal. He spells it RLDL, Real Deal. And so he found out that there was a guy that was teaching. His name was Kevin Funakoshi. You know, he was teaching out in Clear Lake at NASA, and he wanted to kind of share with him his uniform. You know, and that idea of sharing the material of his uniform to Shihan Funakoshi led to, you know, Wade talking to me about him teaching at NASA, and, you know, if I ever get a chance. And man, as soon as I heard that, of course, what was I supposed to do, right? You know, so I got myself at a seminar that Shihan was teaching one day, and I tell you what, man, I think that part of what he saw was this guy who really had a desire to represent well, you know, and to be an ambassador of this philosophy, this way of karate, right? And I thank the Lord that he was able to recognize that, because, man, he just opened up the floodgates in my life and started pouring knowledge and understanding and wisdom and even stories that, you know, people would never know. You know, Kevin Funakoshi, he is Okinawan in his family, so he's Okinawan descent, but he grew up in Hawaii. Whereas Mrs. Funakoshi, his wife, you know, she grew up in Japan. So though they're both Japanese, she is more samurai and he is more surfer, right? So when you talk to him, you know, very approachable, right? You know, our conversations are about maybe 5-6 hours long, you know, and a lot of that is a lot of laughing, you know, and a lot of that, you know, is me just soaking in as much as I could. And of course, you know, I'm thankful that we're able to dialogue in a manner that he's willing to hear, you know, concepts and philosophies, and most of all, just sharing the truth of God, you know, and always, you know, quoting the word of God in our conversation, you know. So, I mean, it's going to happen regardless, right? Whether I'm by myself, you know, right? So in this case, you know, he's getting exposure to the truth of God's word, and of course in the gospel. So, and now fast forward, I'm actually one of the technical directors for the organization. This organization, yeah, thank you, sir. The organization is called FSKA World, which stands for Funakoshi Shotokan Karate Association World. And there's about 19,000 plus members around the world that's part of this organization, you know, and to be able to be given this privilege, man, I'm still like, it's still surreal for me, you know. That plane hasn't landed for me yet, you know, to be that person that was just kind of watching from the sidelines, you know, to now being on the field and, you know, not only engaging in the art, but, you know, being able to be entrusted with the responsibility to navigate people correctly, you know, through the art of Shotokan as well. So, man, I'm drowning in humility, man. You know, I'm already drowning in the humility by the grace of God to be in His kingdom, and now I I get to do this, and be bestowed with this responsibility, man. So I'm forever grateful, bro.
Well, take me back and tell me about how you started your school and from how you started to where you are now, because I know you've opened a new awesome location that's behind you right there. But I remember when you were teaching somewhere else. So give me that journey.
Yes. So during this time, I was working at Kickstart Kids, and one of the things that I really wanted to do was be able to share to the community, the style of Shotokan. I realized that I couldn't do it if I was just teaching at Sugar Land Middle School, because that's where I was designated to teach Kickstart. And so I asked myself, so what's it going to take to get this thing outside to the public, to the community, because, for us as followers of Christ, part of our job is to love the city that we live in, right? And how do we love back the city that we've been positioned to be in by God? So we take our time, our talent, and our treasure, right? And we give it back in that manner. And hopefully, in doing so, God would be glorified. So when I approached the concept, there was a church actually that I was getting ready to meet with. It was March of 2020, and it was going to be right after spring break. We were going to connect, and then I was going to be able to teach at their facility at least twice a week. And if you recall, March of 2020, that was the longest spring break ever, right? People went to spring break and never sprung back. It was definitely a surreal time. And by the time the idea of connecting with that church, it didn't happen, right? Nobody was going to be anywhere. And so I really, really, really prayed about it, man. I ended up eating at this one Chinese restaurant. And then I next door to it was this incredible studio called Beautiful Feet. I decided to walk in there, just kind of see what was going on in there. Spoke to the owner. Her name is Colette. Awesome woman of God, man. Just, in love with the Lord, man, and this whole studio is very Christ-centered, first of all. And so we started talking. I shared with her the idea that I had. And she found out about my background as well when it came to dancing, and teaching. Because I don't know if you knew this, Derrick, but I ended up actually really becoming a professional dance teacher. I ended up actually touring the country. I was teaching in conventions and, in conferences, teaching hip hop, and of course, for me, I think one of the biggest factor that played a role was I didn't just teach hip hop, but I taught the history of hip hop. And I felt like, especially growing up in the Bronx, I felt like I am responsible to making sure that people are educated correctly. So every convention I would teach, I always started with the class with, okay, let me make this very clear. It's called hip hop, not hislop. And people would take a moment and go, what? And then they knew it was going to be an adventure, So when she looked at the background, she said, well, how about this? How about you come in and maybe teach hip hop for now? And while they're building out the second room, because we're looking at expanding, when that opportunity comes, we can incorporate your school here. So lo and behold, I came in teaching hip hop. I was teaching online because everything was online at the time. And when we finally launched it, it was November 10th, 2020. Now, during this time, a lot of martial arts schools, unfortunately, ended up closing its doors. These were challenging times for a lot of businesses, including martial arts schools who, we base our business on contact, right? On face-to-face activities, and so the schools that couldn't function well teaching in online classes or weren't even considering it, unfortunately, were closing. And so the idea of me being able to start the school in the midst of what was happening was already, again, surreal for me. And I felt like it was such a godly provision, right? And then didn't realize till the next day, and the next day being November 11th, that we launched our school on the birthday of Gichin Funakoshi, because he was born November 10th, and it didn't even hit us until the next day. I'm like, oh, what? That's so cool, right? So fast forward, as the school started to reach out to the community, we found ourselves really needing to be able to expand, right? And we were kind of limited to the logistics of the studio because, beautiful feet is beautiful feet first. And as much as Colette accommodated us, it was inevitable, right? The need to expand was inevitable. And when I made my decision to come to an end with Kickstart, that was a tough decision, man, because I felt like for the school to grow, I really need to be there full time. And the work at Kickstart, sometimes it requires you anywhere from 50 to 60 hours a week, right? Because that's a devotion time in and of itself. And I'm forever grateful for that. But I knew that something had to give, right? I couldn't be at 50-50 and then think I'm going to get 100% result, right? Now, I wasn't sure how I was going to take that step. And it just so happened that, I had a personal situation come up with my family. And that really kind of became the defining moment for me. I knew that for me to be there for my family, I needed to be there for my family. And that meant I needed to be there mentally. I needed to be there emotionally. And most of all, I needed to be there spiritually. And that circumstance started really taking a toll, and I felt like I could not focus well enough to do my job properly while I was in Kickstart, and so I felt like it was the defining moment for me. It was the deciding factor, and, getting the peace of God to say, okay, I'm going to go ahead and let them know, spoke to my principal, and then, he spoke to the people at Kickstart. It was a bittersweet moment, man, because I gave them a 3.5 month notice. Okay. So you can imagine 3.5 months, right? I've never even heard of a 3.5 month notice, right? Some people give 2 weeks, some people like right then and there, right? They're gone, so for 3.5 months, I continued to be at Kickstart, continued to spend time with the students there, knowing that coming next school year, I wasn't going to be returning, So it was a bittersweet moment, but, Isaiah 55 verse 12, right? You're going to be sent out with joy and be led forth in peace. And that's really what I lean towards, So August 1st of 2022, that was my last day with Kickstart Kids. It was my last day with Fort Bend School District. It was my official last day at Sugarland Middle School. And right before that, I tried to figure out how we were going to expand, how we were going to grow. And so the number here at the dojo that we're in right now, the location, I prayed about it and I said, okay, Lord, I'm going to call that number. I'm going to call it. I'm going to do it. Right. And of course, I decided to call it at 2:30 in the morning, bro. Okay. And I was like, I don't know why I did that, but I'm like, okay, if God is telling me to do this, I'm going to do this right now. And so the landlord calls me back at 5:30 in the morning and he's like, okay, well, let's talk. What are you doing in an hour? I was like, getting up. He goes, okay, so you need more time? I said, yes, please. So we ended up meeting around 1 p.m. And all right, so here it is, right? I'm thinking like, I'm going to land this plane. We're going to be good to go. We're getting ready to shift into a new location. Then he turns around and says this. All right, so the thing is, I do a background check and I'm like, oh, done. I'm good to go, right? And we do a credit check. I was like, right? And credit. I was like, well, how high up a credit is this? He goes, well, I'm very particular with my tenants, so I need to know that these people need to be approved for a $300,000 house. I'm like, oh, well, all right, then, yeah, credit check away. So for me, I'm like, okay, well, I guess we're staying at the studio a little longer. And lo and behold, man, he calls up this person who does all the credit check for him. And she's out of town, right? He calls her up and says, hey, there's this guy, potential tenant. I need for you to do a background check on him. I need to do a credit check on him, and then that's going to tell me what I need to do, And she's like, listen, I'm out of town. I'm on vacation with my family. That's going to take a little bit of time. So I really can't do that. But at the same time, I've heard about that guy, and I've heard about all the things that he has done for the community. And I can tell you right now, I'm just going to go ahead and give you the green light to approve him. Go for it.
Wow.
He's
God is good.
Go. Dude, that was all the Lord. That was all the Lord.
Definitely.
That to me was like, okay, cool. Calling at 2:30 in the morning was exactly what I needed to do, and then that was it, man. So come August, we found ourselves being able to do the final, construction, do some building modifications in here, and make it conducive to what we needed for the classes. And yeah, so far so good, man. And so far the growth has been steady, which I prefer over like an influx of people. I was talking to a friend of mine last week, as a matter of fact. I told him, man, I said, if 50 people walk through that door right now to sign up, as fast as they signed up is as fast as I would lose them. I got to make sure that I'm in position, that our school is in position to accommodate that type of growth. And of course, God is so faithful, right? And that's my prayer. It's like, Lord, I just want to steward what it is that you have for me, and I want to steward it well, so you bring them according to what is going to fit this level of stewardship. And so it's been like that. Now, mind you, I've also had a couple of moments where, I kind of wanted those 50 students coming into the doors, but yeah, no, it's been a steady growth, and it's been an encouragement thus far. And I've never been more excited, man.
Tell everybody where your academy is located.
Yeah. So our school is located in Richmond, Texas. We are actually, our location is overlapping two school districts: Lamar Consolidated School District and Fort Bend School District. We're specifically right off of Highway 90 and 359. The actual address is 222 FM 359 Suite letter E, Richmond, Texas 77406. You can also find us on Facebook at Funakoshi Karate Texas, abbreviated TX, on Facebook. So that's Funakoshi Karate TX, and you can find us.
What's funny about the relationship you and I share is, I believe I was living close to the Sugar Land area, and that's where we met. Then there was a period where I moved to the Humble area. You were living out in Humble. Now I'm in the Missouri City area. You're living the next town over, which is Richmond.
I know, man. It's crazy. The thing is that the McDonald's that you and I first met in, I'm going to tell you exactly where it was. Okay, bro? Go ahead. It was Bammel, North Houston. Okay? It was Bammel, North Houston. I don't know how you ended up over there at the time.
Really? I thought it was in the Sugar Land on 59.
Thing. No, because so Humble was like our commonality, right?
Yeah.
But it was the craziest thing because it was Bammel, North Houston, around the 249 area.
Really?
And yeah, that's where we actually met. And then later on, we actually reconnected again at Leap of Faith, right? You remember that dance studio?
Yeah, and Humble,
Leap of
absolutely,
Faith, right?
Yeah.
So yeah, for sure. That's so surreal, man. I mean, we can definitely revisit those journeys, man. But you're right. so many connecting aspects that God has just like orchestrated this whole time, and to stay connected, and how we would reconnect here and there.
Yeah,
it's been amazing.
Definitely God. Now let's let me ask you, everything, your entire journey, all the lessons, all the hardships, all the successes, what are the lessons you learned along the way you'd like to share?
Gosh, where do I begin?
We don't have much time.
Yeah. So my life right now is filled with trophies of grace. That's it, right? That's all I have. I was just talking to my son actually yesterday. We were talking about 1 Corinthians chapter 5, verse 7, where we walk by faith and not by sight. And I asked Liam, he's 10. I said, so what does that mean? And he says, to walk by sight is to walk with our limited sight. We can only see three ways. We can see what's in front of us. We can see based on memory and experience, or we can see based on guessing, right? Or assumption. And to walk by faith is to walk through with God's eyes, where his sight is not limited, that he is omnipresent. He can see past, present, and future. And more important than that is we're also seeing it through his heart, and his heart is his nature. And his part of his nature is God is good, right? He's not just, sovereign over all things, but he's good. And so my life right now has culminated to getting an even deeper understanding of that, of what it means to walk by faith and not by sight. I also learned that, when God says that he works all things out for the good, for those who love him and are called according to his purpose, it literally means all, right? Not one thing is wasted with God. He is the redeemer of all things. He's not the author of evil, but God is the only person that can use sin sinlessly, right? That's why, he can redeem all things. And so when I look at my life today, and I look at where I've been, the things that I've gone through, and the things that I was not stuck in because I got through it, right? It was all by the grace of God, and I had a guy one time said this to me. He said, Kato, I know you're in the middle of a storm right now, but do me a favor, pay attention to what you do during the storm, because whatever you do during the storm is what you end up with once you come out the other side, right? Come on, bro. How profound is that, right?
Absolutely.
Simple yet profound. And it really made me realize, I got to anchor myself in God, anchor myself in the Lord, because above all things, when everything passes away, the only thing that's going to be consistent and constant and will endure is God and the word of God and his truth, So yeah, so if I can share anything with people, it would be, visit what it means to trust in God. Really visit what that means, seek him, ask him, what that means, and that, and by his grace, that for those that don't know the Lord as Lord and Savior, that God would share and extend his mercies, right? The Bible says that the saving arms of God are never too short, so, definitely for sure, man, just redeeming qualities of God that my life is what it is, just trophies of grace.
Well, that's a great way to end this episode. And I want to thank you, Kato, for being on the show, but for being a friend and for doing everything you're doing for the martial arts community here in Houston.
Well, man, thank you for this opportunity, man. I'm humbled just to even be considered, man. And most of all, to do it with you. Derrick, I mean, you're doing an incredible, not only job, but it's an incredible responsibility, to put a lot of this information out there for people to have access to. And even if it's just to provoke thought, right? And get them to start thinking about things that they never would have considered, So thank you for your walk of obedience into making this podcast happen. So more
Awesome.
blessings to you, bro. Love you, man.
Love you too, bro. Catch you later.
All right.
One more shout out to Kato. If you're in the Richmond, Texas area and want to check out his dojo, his links are in the description. You can also follow my new graphic novel, The Gentleman's Guild. Yes, I'm making a graphic novel. It's called The Gentleman's Guild with artist E. Canales. You can sign up for the mailing list now. The link for that is also in the description. And don't forget to watch Lion Killer, my debut feature film. That's right, I made a movie. It's called Lion Killer. It stars Regina Ting-Chen, who's currently on season 4 of Stranger Things. You can watch it at Amazon Prime, Tubi TV, Freevee, the Roku channel, or you can pop on over to the YouTube channel called V Movies. And thanks for watching this episode of FURYCAST. Well, that's it for today's show. Make sure you like this video, comment down below, or simply leave me a pound, FURYCAST. You can also subscribe to the channel, and yes, even smash that bell so you can be notified every time a FURYCAST video drops. Till next time, peace.